Okay, so hello and welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at German leadership from World War II, Genius or Insanity, an animated history by the Armchair Historian. Their stuff's in the description. Go ahead and go leave them a like. They make this content so we can all react to it and I can give my input on it. All right? So, without further ado, let's get on with it.
Despite being jostled and bounced about by the primitive suspension of his tank, the German radio operator remains calm as he listens to the chatter between his unit and the others currently sweeping through the small commune of Aven. The news is always the same. The French are in full retreat, and the 7th Panzer Division is advancing so fast that even High Command cannot keep track of them. But not everything is perfect. At that moment, neither man cares about the demands of some senior staff officer 100 miles away from the front line. Their orders come from Rommel, and thanks to his leadership, they have taken more ground in a day than the German Empire could in 3 years. As men back at headquarters continue yelling demands for information and reports across the airwaves, the Ghost Division rumbles onwards to victory. Hi.
So, yeah, the 7th Panzer Division, or the Ghost Division, under Rommel. So the reason they're all fucking panicking about where their positions are and demanding that to know is because they don't know where their division is. They have no idea if they're about to be flanked. They have no reports of anything that they are doing. They're going so fast. That's why they attempt to tell Rommel to fucking stop. But again, he bends his orders as much as he can, and Guderian, I believe, at this point is trying to shield him. And he just tells him you need to keep going until you are told to actually stop. So, yeah, he did a very risky maneuver that could have ended in failure, but it didn't, so.
I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. In the decades since the Second World War, the rise and fall of Nazi Germany has been analyzed from countless angles. But one question that's often overlooked is how big of a role German leadership played in the downfall. Were the men who commanded the armies of the Third Reich military geniuses brought down by impossible odds, incompetent madmen driven by pure luck, or somewhere in between? In this video, we'll try to answer that question by examining the military hierarchy of Nazi Germany and how their decisions led their country first to conquest, then to ruin.
I will say that they are somewhere in the middle. They were definitely, as a general staff, they were definitely better than the French. They were better than the British in the early term. Better than the Italians, and, but that's not hard. And then Japanese leadership in World War II wasn't exactly amazing. And they definitely had better officers in the first bit of Barbarossa, but there's a whole story behind the reason for that. But again, just their education, their whole way, he'll probably get into this, but the whole way of their leadership, it is something to be remarked and even built upon. And it is even today, but there were problems, which we'll probably get into.
During the Second World War, burnout and poor nutrition was a major issue faced by German officers, resulting in brilliant strategies like Erwin Rommel suffering serious bouts of illness and poor health while on campaign. That's why the sponsor of today's video is Noom. Sign up today with Noom by going to noom.com/armchairhistorian and take advantage of a program that combines proven cognitive behavior therapy techniques and the power of modern technology. Noom asks just 10 minutes a day from its users and provides long-term results, coaching you on how to change your behavior and improve your lifestyle. As a busy person, I appreciate that Noom doesn't take the world from its users, but instead develops a roadmap for their specific health needs and goals, and proposes simple, incremental changes that result in a lasting impact. Some members of our production team were enthusiastic to try Noom out, and they especially liked the meal log and intuitive food classification system, which simplifies how to think about caloric intake and what to eat and why, as well as the lessons designed to highlight motivations behind some of the food choices we make and identify the root causes of issues like stress or anxiety and how to manage them. Get started on Noom today by taking a simple 30-second quiz at noom.com/armchairhistorian or download Noom via the link in the description below. Since Adolf Hitler's initial rise to power in 1933, his sights were set on the complete consolidation and control of the German military, which he finally achieved in 1938. Two manufactured scandals, collectively known as the Blomberg-Fritsch affair, led to the removal of War Minister Werner von Blomberg and Commander-in-Chief Werner von Fritsch from their posts. This allowed for Hitler to take over as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and restructure the Ministry of War into the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, or OKW.
Now you may ask why he wasn't Commander-in-Chief. Long story short, Prussia had the term of a military within a state was still true in 1933. Even if Hitler did win the chancellorship, which he did, and then did a whole bunch of other stuff, it doesn't mean that the army was totally loyal to him. So he worked on this for a very long time and removed the two people basically that were his obstacles. Because remember, Hindenburg was dead at this point, so there wasn't really anybody besides those two to stop him. And once he was able to get rid of them, then he can actually become commander-in-chief.
Hitler appointed Wilhelm Keitel, a man quickly won over to the Führer, as chief of OKW's general staff, and made Alfred Jodl, another loyalist, head of the WFST, or operations staff.
So what this means is these two men directly report to Hitler, and they are the two most powerful people in the OKW, which is basically the armed forces. So he's chief of the general staff, is Wilhelm Keitel. Again, this man will be executed in Nuremberg. And then the head of operations, again, is probably his second.
WFST, or operations staff. These men, particularly Keitel, functioned...
Yes, so most generals in the OKW had open contempt for Keitel, considering him, in Keitel's own words, a complacent and incompetent yes man. And I would be, in fact, to agree with him. He wasn't actually very good at his job, but he was loyal to Hitler, and he was a yes man and did whatever Hitler told him to do. So... I mean, if that's what you want in a chief of the general staff, then Hitler got what he wanted.
As little more than mouthpieces for Adolf Hitler, a means to ensure his hold on the military was absolute. Beneath Jodl and Keitel, the OKW was split into three main branches. The OKH, Army High Command, initially led by Army Commander-in-Chief Walter von Brauchitsch, the OKM, Commander of the Navy, led by Naval Commander-in-Chief and Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, and the OKL, Commander of the Air Force, headed by its Air Force Commander-in-Chief Hermann Göring.
Yeah, so it's important to remember at this point, so Hermann Göring, I don't think he was made a field marshal yet, but the OKW is basically all the military branches report to Keitel and Frieglein, his second for the operations. So Keitel first, him is second for operations. And then goes to the OKH, which is the Army, OKM, which is the Marine, which is led by Erich Raeder, and then you got the OKL, that at this time is led by Hermann Göring, which is basically the Air Force, or the Luftwaffe.
These branches all reported to the OKW on operational matters, but aside from semi-regular interventions by Adolf Hitler himself, their leaders avoided joint consultation and operated more or less independently. The structure of...
Yes, and that is important to remember, that these people basically operated independently, and they did not really talk to each other at all for really anything. They were semi-do combined arms sometimes if it benefited the leaders of them to do so, but the Navy wasn't going to contact the Army to do an amphibious landing if the Navy thought they could do a strike force mission and gain more prestige. It's a long story short, but this right here isn't uncommon even for the Allies. The British had problems, and the USA had problems with this too, to a way lesser extent, but still problems with this system. But Japan and Italy is the example you could point to where this system was just taken overdrive and they couldn't work basically on anything together.
Of the military hierarchy became even more disjointed in 1940, with the introduction of the Waffen-SS as an independent fourth branch of the armed services that answered only to Hitler.
Yes, and this is important to remember. So Hitler still had these guys, and they basically had to tell them what to do. Now, as commander-in-chief, he wanted to have a different branch that was technically only loyal to him, which was the Waffen-SS. In 1940, Himmler was in charge of the Waffen-SS at this point, and he reported basically directly to Hitler, and these were basically his personal troops and personal bodyguards at 1940. in 1939 for the invasion of Poland, and they would start to expand way more later in the rest of World War II, and they start to gain prominence, have whole divisions, and all that stuff. Okay, that they remember they're not under army command. Now, this is going to lead to a lot of friction between the OKH and the Waffen-SS on many different things, equipment. Unit organization, manpower, everything is going to be a contest between the OKH and the Waffen-SS, mainly. Again, the other two branches, have problems, but it's mainly going to be between the OKH and the Waffen-SS for resources. This is why the Waffen-SS had different camo during the war than the OKH. It's because they had to supply their own camo, they had to supply their own scopes for their sniper rifles. It's a whole different logistics train because they're not under the army's command.
Under die-hard Nazi Heinrich Himmler, the SS operated with...
Yeah, so Hitler intended to build the SS into a militarized police force to handle occupation duties, but their organization's strength was always needed to support their front lines. Yeah, so they were pushed into the front line role, and then also Himmler wanted them to be like his elite troops for the Nazi regime, and he wanted them to be the best of the best. Again, this is 1939. Before that, and even 1940, but after that, they start recruiting from different nations, and the reason they do this, again, they have to recruit from different nations, is very simply because the OKH is the army, and they are conscripting Germans into their army, obviously. The Waffen-SS gets second to all of these guys on conscription duties, okay? So the Waffen-SS has the bare pickings. Again, when the actual war starts, before the war, they had, they could select based on Aryanism and all that stuff. After the war starts, when these guys need a lot more men, the Waffen-SS are getting second-handed. So this is why they have to recruit Dutch, Denmark, Norway. They have Swedish volunteers. They have Belgian volunteers, French volunteers. They even have, I think, Muslim volunteers at one point. And the whole reason for all of that was because they couldn't really recruit German conscripts into the Waffen-SS. Again, mostly. They just got second-hand guys.
Only to Hitler. Under die-hard Nazi Heinrich Himmler, the SS operated with a separate budget, administration, training centers, uniform, and rank system.
Yeah, and all of that what he just said was true. They operated on everything different.
Assigned to support the Wehrmacht in the field, SS units tended to operate without the approval or even knowledge of the OKW.
Yeah, so again, with the OKW, if you take a look back, actually, I'll play it a little bit.
Disconnected though they were, all branches of the German...
No, so the OKW, again, they were technically nominally in charge of all the rest of them, except the Waffen-SS. So when the Waffen-SS was out there, the OKW didn't really know why they were there, what they were doing, and they had different, operation command because, Hitler.
The approval or even knowledge of the OKW. Disconnected though they were, all branches of the German military under the Nazis were united by one thing: complete subservience to the will of Adolf Hitler. While certainly not omnipotent in his dealings with the military, it is impossible to deny the overbearing influence this one man had on the destiny of his self-proclaimed Reich. While not as incompetent as many have since depicted him, Hitler possessed a set of ideals that resulted in many of his decisions not being entirely guided by careful, calculated assessments of the situation at hand. Rather, he was driven by his beliefs, namely that his so-called Aryan race was superior to all others.
I won't disagree with that. Again, Hitler was not as stupid as people think. Especially early in the war, he really did just let the generals do what the fuck they wanted. It's after Stalingrad and then a little bit before Stalingrad, because again, Hitler wanted to go to the oil fields, they wanted to go to Moscow, so he kind of let them do what the fuck they wanted. Again, they would disobey him, there would be a whole bunch of shit, okay? But again, early on, he did just let them do really what they wanted, especially for France. He didn't have a big hand in what happened. But later on, he would start to get more hands-on. Now, again, there are some decisions the generals make that are fucking retarded, and he made the right call. There are some decisions where Hitler made the wrong call, and the generals are telling him, don't do it. Kursk is an example of that. Kursk is an example of Hitler trying to stop that, if I remember correctly. And the generals were like, no, this will work. Stuff like that.
After their incredible victory in France, this view spread throughout the high command, confirming in the minds of Hitler and his inner circle that they were unstoppable, and that Nazism was the key to achieving total victory. This conviction was unshakable, and behind every order Hitler...
Yeah, so early in the war, Hitler personally planned a glider assault on the supposedly impregnable Belgian fortress of Elp-en, capturing the fortress with a force of 85 men. Now, this fortress is very important. One of the first uses of airborne infantry to successfully assault a thing that was impenetrable. They took this, and then they could assault Belgium basically without the pain in the ass of a fortress being there.
Hitler gave, in his time as Führer, lay a certainty that, if his people simply held firm and followed his orders, they could not possibly be defeated. Contrary to the post-war grumbling of many prominent generals, Germany's military...
Yeah, despite the widespread frame of the 1944 bomb plot, Operation Valkyrie, to assassinate Hitler consisted of over 35 generals out of the over 2,000 active in the military. Now, that is a crazy number of generals.
Military elites were all more than happy to fall in line with the Nazi regime, even before later victories lent Hitler's ideas a veneer of legitimacy. Many of these men shared the Nazis' goals, others were bought with lavish gifts of cash, land, and tax exemptions, and others feared the anger of the people if they went against the leader who had secured their complete devotion. In other words, whether out of genuine devotion, mutual benefit, bribery, or fear, all but a handful of Germany's military leaders were fully committed to the Nazi vision of a 1,000-year Reich. For all their later claims of discontent and unwilling cooperation with madman Hitler, many of his generals stuck by him all the way through the war, right up until the Reich started to collapse around them.
Yeah, then they started to get out of there as fast as they could.
The most defining features of Nazi Germany's military leadership stemmed, for better and for worse, from the fact that ultimate authority over all operations rested on a single man. Regardless of any strategic assessments, logistical concerns, or consensus among his advisors, Adolf Hitler could make any decision he wanted about the course of the war, and everyone else would simply have to obey. At the best of times, this meant that the labyrinthine military bureaucracy could be bypassed with the stroke of the Führer's pen. Sweeping changes in doctrine, tactics, and equipment could be implemented instantly, letting the Wehrmacht adapt to new circumstances with breathtaking speed.
This is true. Since Hitler was technically CNC, so Commander-in-Chief is what CNC means, or Command and Control also. But he did this, and it lets you bypass a lot of bureaucracy. If you haven't worked in a government job before, let me tell you, there's a lot of fucking bureaucracy there. And to get all the way up, it takes forever. And sometimes it just doesn't fucking get up there. So being able to bypass it is certainly a positive, okay? Roosevelt really couldn't do this, and so Churchill was more, he could. The only other person that really could do this was Stalin. And Stalin did it, and Stalin purged his generals, and he was the overall commander of the Soviet Union, and he could do whatever the fuck he wanted. Even more powerful than Hitler at certain points, if you can believe that or not. But, you know. For example, German U-boats sank over 3 million tons worth of American ships due to the total refusal of the Admiralty to adopt proven and reliable British anti-submarine tactics for nearly 8 months. This is technically true. This is more of the British just fucking they believed so much in sonar that they forgot about they basically just didn't want to do convoys, like groups of convoys to Britain. So they had single ships going out, just like the First World War, and they got sunk, and then it took them forever to adapt. So, but again, Germany only had like 20 subs at this point, so.
This stood in stark contrast to the Allied forces, who often had to put up with months of committee meetings, field tests, and observational trials before implementing even the smallest innovations. On the other hand,
this is very true. So when you work with a whole bunch of nations on a whole bunch of different issues, and then you have your own generals fighting against your own generals, yeah, it leads to this bullshit, which is a whole bunch of bureaucracy, nothing gets done, or it takes a very long time for anything to get done. Whereas Hitler was able to bypass all of this in one pen stroke. Sometimes. And sometimes he was right, and sometimes he was wrong.
Innovations. On the other hand, this system encouraged officers to bitterly compete with each other for power and prestige.
So yes, this is true. Also, Erwin Rommel was especially skilled at appealing to the Führer, allowing him to rise through the ranks fast enough to earn the envy of many of his peers. Not only that, Erwin Rommel was not a Prussian. He was not a Prussian aristocrat. Many generals looked at him like that. They said that this man is not. They did not like him because he was not Prussian, and he had a lot of envy. He was very loyal to Hitler in the beginning. Okay, in 1939, even before then, and then up to a point. Okay, 41, 42 is when he started to get a little flaky. But he was loyal to Hitler, and that's what Hitler did value in him. Erwin Rommel was actually one of his leading his SS bodyguard at one point, if I remember correctly.
As whoever could catch Hitler's ear at a crucial moment would usually receive preferential treatment. This extreme inter-service rivalry inevitably resulted in Germany's resources being squandered on futile wonder weapon projects, or simply hoarded by one branch of the military for the sake of denying them to the competition.
So yeah, that is true. And the two people that are fighting right now, this is the SS over here, and this is the Wehrmacht over here, over supplies, which is very true.
To the competition. This is not to say that the High Command made nothing but snap decisions based on personal intuition, far from it. Hitler's Wehrmacht inherited a tradition of military philosophy and command structures going back to the 19th century, later refined through the interwar period through Weimar reformists like Hans von Seeckt.
Yes, and it is important to remember that the army that Hitler got in 33 and went to war with in 39 was completely built up during the Weimar Republic. They went over why they lost World War I, what tactics they had to change, what they had to do, their officer corps, who could serve. Again, they had to change everything during the Weimar Republic to build up to the army that basically stormed France.
Refined through the interwar period through Weimar reformists like Hans von Seeckt.
And yes, again, Hans von Seeckt and all of the guys in the Weimar period don't get enough credit for the army that they actually were able to put together and put in the field in 1939.
One of these strategic traditions, the most innovative and important, was Kriegsspiele, or war games, a series of planning exercises aimed at examining the strengths and weaknesses of every player active in the field of war. Alongside the...
And again, those war games actually do matter. Now, again, general staffs do this sometimes, time to time. Again, the American system, let's put it this way. Eisenhower, if I remember correctly, before the war, before it even kicked off, I believe he was a major or a colonel. That's how far he rose from up to 4-star that quickly. But he was a staff guy. And again, the U.S. Army, it kind of playing war games. The Army was, let's put it this way, the Army was the backwater while the Navy received most of the funding during the Great Depression. Again, money's tight. The Navy has to get the money because we have two oceans next to us and no one nor north and south that can attack us again. So war games like this don't really happen that much for the Americans.
These laborious planning stages, the decentralized nature of German tactical command worked most to their advantage during the early stages of the war, thanks to the philosophy of Auftragtaktik, or mission-type tactics.
So Auftragtaktik or mission-type tactics, basically, boiling it down, you are an officer, you are trained, you are expected to make your decisions, and you are expected to follow the orders that I give you, not to the letter, but to their intent. And you must be able to have the initiative, and you must be able to determine what is best to carry out these orders, okay? If you have to bend them to do what is needed as the intention of the order, then you are allowed to do that, okay? Whereas the French system didn't fucking happen. Officers couldn't deviate from plans. It led to problems.
This approach emphasized that it was the outcome of a mission that mattered most, not the individual steps to accomplish it. Field commanders were given great autonomy to take objectives, plan offensives, and direct the flow of battle without needing to run every decision up the chain of command.
Yes, and that if you have to run up decisions like that, it's going to paralyze your command and what you can do. Again, Germans are like, I need you to take this fortress town. Good luck. And then the general would be able to plan his offensive and do whatever he needed to do to take it, okay? That's mission-type tactics in a nutshell.
This methodology allowed Axis field commanders the freedom to make snap decisions and react dynamically to the evolving situation, while enemy officers were still waiting to be acknowledged by their seniors. The invasion of France was perhaps the quintessential example of mission-type tactics in action, proceeding so quickly that the 7th Panzer Division was completely unreachable. Led by Erwin Rommel, this armored division moved so swiftly and independently that neither their enemies nor their superiors could locate them, earning the unit the nickname Ghost Division. Meanwhile, the strategic picture was...
Yes, on the other hand, French forces were often paralyzed in indecision. French officers frequently refused to use their radio messages and instead demanding orders to be given to them in writing. That was more of the French High Command that led to that. And again, the High Command was completely at fault for what happened in France. I'm not going to make two ways about it. If any French viewers, sorry, your High Command was dog shit, okay? You had good guys that were able to make some decisions, but they weren't at the general staff level. Charles Goodall, can't even say his name right. But he wasn't even he might have been a 1-star in for the Battle of France, and he tried his fucking hardest, but he couldn't get through. He was told stop. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happened for the High Command. Again, indecision. There's a whole video I actually did on this. You can go look back on the French, on why the French, fucked up. But yeah, basically, the High Command was really bad. A lot of indecisions, whole bunch of stuff. The actual officers in the field were pretty good, okay? They were pretty good. But if your High Command is bad, you're fucked.
Further muddled by the actions of the SS, who were deployed to pursue their own objectives, only sometimes in connection to the rest of the army. But as High Command struggled to keep up with the situation, the men on the ground were busy taking the principles of Auftragtaktik to heart. Led by veterans of the Great War, the Wehrmacht was able to engage in a series of stunning offensive maneuvers that caught their enemies completely off guard. Astonishingly, field officers managed to organize a coherent strategy of rapid combined arms warfare more or less on the fly, using military theories and concepts that had formerly existed only as thought exercises or, at best, small-scale experiments during the invasions of Poland and Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, so they were able to put it together for Battle of France, because again, Poland was very fucking quickly, and Czechoslovakia, it was basically just you walked in there. And again, they had to come up with all this on the fly. That's how good their field grade officers were. So field grade officers are like up to colonel, so they're leading regiments. And again, they had to basically come up with it on the fly for combined arms tactics, and they were very damn good at it.
Improvisation would have caused the immediate disintegration of any other army in Europe, but the highly disciplined and motivated German soldiers maintained implicit trust in their leaders, even when supplies were running short and seemingly insurmountable odds lay before them.
Now, that is very true. That's another aspect, is not just that they had very good officers throughout the entire German army, especially in the Battle of France. It is also the fact that everyone that was serving at this point wanted to be there. There were some conscripts, but most of them were volunteers. Most of them had a lot of training. A lot of them had trained together with their units a long time before the Battle of France. They had trust in their officers. They had trust in their high command. All of these factors combined together leads to France. France wasn't a fluke. It was planned out, let's put it that way.
Unfortunately for Germany, the tactical genius displayed by officers in the field only really served to compensate for the deeply dysfunctional structure of the OKW. Instead of learning from their successes and forging closer ties in the face of adversity, senior officers became more and more obsessed with hoarding power and influence for themselves.
Yes, that is true. And especially after France, that becomes immensely true. France, they actually work together, and you see what happens.
With Hitler able to appoint and dismiss officers entirely at his own discretion, job stability within the Third Reich was non-existent, incentivizing bitter inter-service rivalries. In essence, the German system was best at producing lone wolf officers, men who could confidently tackle any assignment, but who refused to set aside their differences to take down larger prey.
And this is true, it's sharing the glory. Again, Germany is not unique here. Montgomery, Patton, Douglas MacArthur, you name it, they had fucking big egos, and this wasn't, just put it this way, the Allied powers were not immune to this. Even the Soviet powers, they had a lot of guys that did this. Obviously the one that's most familiar with is, I'm blanking out on his name. Georgy Zhukov. Again, he was leading one of the guys, I think fucking field armies, and for Berlin. He basically, Stalin said, hey, you two, you fight to get to Berlin. So he wanted inter-service rivalry, is what Stalin wanted. Again, Germany's not unique here, but it was particularly bad for them. Japan is on their own thing. They had the worst. And then Italy is second to Japan, and then Germany, in my opinion.
In contrast to the chaos which would later come, German strategists had ample time before the war to plan for their first invasions, and this thoroughness swiftly dismembered the Czechoslovakian and Polish states. In the latter campaign, the strategy of spreading German forces across the Polish borders to achieve a pincer maneuver proved extremely effective, but it required taking extreme risks that conventional military wisdom would have deemed unacceptable. General Erich von Manstein later wrote of the superior discipline and fighting spirit of the German soldiers, but also acknowledged that much of the invasion's unexpected success came in part to the losers' own mistakes, and above all, as a result of the complete inaction of Poland's Western allies at the time of her defeat.
This is very true, because again, France actually did attack across their border, and they could have gone very fucking far into German territory, but they didn't. They pulled back.
Though the OKW had hoped for a period of calm to analyze the reports of the Polish campaign, Hitler's announcement of the imminent invasion of France threw everything into a frenzy. During the months that followed, OKH officers went back and forth with Hitler and among themselves to try and form a cohesive plan to invade France. The strategy which emerged, known as Fallgelb, called for...
Yes, Operation Fallgelb is basically the invasion of the Netherlands and Belgium. And it was remarkably similar to the Stephen Plan from World War I. A fact noted with great concern by some generals, but the commander of this operation wanted to do this.
The main assault into northern Belgium through the Netherlands, engaging Anglo-French forces across a long front. Unbeknownst to the Germans, this attack was exactly what the Allies were preparing for. Their defensive strategy at the time, known as the Dial Plan, was designed to push back a traditional invasion through northern Belgium by erecting a strong defensive line from Givet to Antwerp along the Meuse and Dial rivers.
This is true. That was the plan. Whole bunch of bullshit happened. King of Belgium is at fault for this. King Leopold bailed out of the alliance, didn't build the fortifications. Brussels got fucked. Plan fell apart.
Keenly aware of Fallgelb's weaknesses, General Heinz Guderian and Erich von Manstein engaged in a bitter feud with its chief proponent, the much more conservative and restrained Gerrit von Rundstedt. Guderian later wrote, "The situation became even tenser when it became clear that not even Colonel General von Rundstedt had any clear idea about the potentialities of tanks, and declared himself in favor of the more cautious solution. Now is the time when we needed a Manstein." What saved the Germans was, perhaps, a stroke of luck. On January 10, 1940, a German aircraft carrying details of Fallgelb crashed in Belgium. This crash, later known as the Mechelen incident, gave the Allies crucial intelligence about the German plans and consequently forced Hitler and his generals to reconsider Fallgelb.
Yes, perfect example of that. Even a stroke of luck, as everyone calls it, it was. Now, it basically made them rewrite their plan on the fly. General Lee in 1862, again, same thing happened. He had special order, I think, 012, if I remember correctly. Basically, they invade the North. The Union found it, stroke of luck, he had to pull back instead of invading the North. The strokes of luck can really change the outcome of a lot of fucking shit.
At this crucial turning point, General Manstein convinced the Führer to adopt his plan for the invasion: drive an armored spearhead through the Ardennes forest in the south as the main assault, while distracting the Allies with a secondary attack in the north. The Manstein plan, relying on more modern tactics than its predecessor, was a shocking success, leading to the capitulation of France in only 6 weeks. The German...
So again, the plan, basically, the original plan was to sweep from the Netherlands into Belgium with basically an infantry assault and just assault the Allied lines. Again, plans were found out. They knew the fuck they were going to do that. British and French and the Belgians and the Dutch were going to be able to defend that. But plans fucking went awry. Had to come up with it on the fly. Punch through the Ardennes, encircle everything north of Calais, and yeah, it was pretty much over at that point.
Germans followed up their conquest of France with a series of quick, decisive victories in the Balkans, rapidly toppling Yugoslavia and Greece. From the outside, the Nazi war machine seemed like an unstoppable juggernaut, executing its operations with perfect discipline and efficiency. Peeling back the curtain, however, reveals a more complicated state of affairs. The Balkans campaign was a success, but the strategists in the general staff were flying by the seat of their pants through most of the operations, and major strategic decisions continued to be made on the basis of whichever scheme Hitler could be persuaded of at a given time. This almost spelt disaster in Crete, where the Luftwaffe attempted a mass paratrooper landing that nearly cost them an entire airborne division. This highlighted a critical weakness in the Nazi organizational structure, as they had no way of assessing the merits of new, unorthodox tactics except by implementing them on the battlefield.
I guess that is true. Crete was an extreme example of this. And it was the last airborne assault that Germany did. They really did think that this was going to fucking work. But paratroopers landing without their equipment, having handguns against guys that were entrenched, a whole air landing division, a whole bunch of stuff that happened on Crete. But yes, the Balkans and Greece are prime examples. They didn't know what the fuck. They were flying by the seat of their pants. They were planning it as it was going on.
However, it was on the Eastern Front that the disjointed and competitive nature of the German High Command started to cost them dearly. Operation Barbarossa was wildly successful at first, but the lack of communication between the branches of the military caused immediate logistical problems, not helped by Hitler's constant micromanagement, which had begun to alienate his commanders in the field. Then, as soon as the mighty lightning assault faltered, Hitler began seeking out scapegoats, laying the blame on the old guard officers who were not fully subservient to him and his ideology. He
not much of the burnout among the officer corps, with many excellent commanders like Rommel and Rundstedt suffering from exhaustion and health issues after months of non-stop action. This is true. Again, the highly competitive nature of what was basically Barbarossa was a culmination of everything wrong with the German military was going to be seen on full display there. The quick lightning strikes that they were able to do, basically against all European countries but the Soviet Union, that is what finally Barbarossa put that basically all on display, the actual weaknesses of the German military.
He fired Brauchitsch after the general's stress-induced heart attack, replacing him as head of the OKH, then proceeded on a spree of forced retirements and dismissals. By the beginning of 1942, over 30 generals, corps and division commanders, and senior officers were removed from command. The leaders who had won so many victories, largely through their own skill and determination in the absence of communication from high command, were gone. Those who remained became increasingly reluctant to bring bad news to the Führer or contradict him in any way.
And that's really bad. Now, this happened to Stalin too. Let's not make two ways about it. The Soviet Union is almost a mirror, you could say, of the fucking Germans, except they had different strategies and shit. But yeah, same thing. Didn't want to bring bad news to Stalin. The whole episode I could do on that, just for Stalin. But these are basically mirroring each other, communism and fascism.
Instead, the generals operating along the Eastern Front began increasingly overpromising on what their depleted units could still achieve, still hoping to earn a greater portion of the army's rapidly dwindling resources. This trend spelled disaster, nowhere more so than at Stalingrad. Logistical failures and a lack of coordination plagued the assaulting forces, all while those at the top stubbornly insisted that total victory was just around the corner. General Hans Jeschkenecht.
This is technically true, and also the Luftwaffe overpromised, again, as he's saying, overpromised that they could, supply the army. They couldn't do shit.
One of the senior officers of the OKL assured Hitler that the Luftwaffe could keep the troops trapped in Stalingrad supplied, despite their complete inability to do so. General Manstein also...
Again, one of those things of the generals just lying to Hitler. This is why in 44-45 Hitler's like, my generals will just keep lying to me.
Strongly urged the Führer not to order the encircled 6th Army to break out. And
this is true. After the war, Manstein attempted to save face by claiming, contrary to the facts, that he had begged Hitler to make the 6th Army break out,
insisting he could break through the Soviet lines with his own men and relieve Stalingrad. However, such a feat was wholly beyond his capabilities by that point, and the forces in Stalingrad were abandoned. With their loss went any hope of victory on the Eastern Front. By 1944, the writing was on the wall for Nazi Germany. Fooled by Allied misdirection campaigns, the German leaders failed to foresee or adequately defend against the Normandy landings. With a new weapon...
I wouldn't say that. They knew it was coming. They knew where they thought it would be coming, which was Calais. But Rommel fucking knew that it would be Normandy. And he wanted to get the Panzers on the beach, but they were told that they had to be in reserve near Paris, and that the Fuhrer was the only person that could move those fucking units. It's not necessarily on the general staff there.
Western Front opened, and the Eastern Front close to collapsing, there was not much anyone could have done to turn the tides. Meanwhile, Hitler continued to tighten his grip on the military even further.
That is true. He did, as the war progressed and it went even worse, he did tighten his grip on the military.
After a failed assassination attempt on July 20th, over 7,000 suspected collaborators were arrested and nearly 4,500 were executed. There was almost nobody left at this point who could go against the increasingly erratic whims of Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, pretty much anybody that was left after the Valkyrie operation, there was very few, if anybody, left that could oppose it.
Ordered scorched earth tactics to deny the Allies the chance to resupply, and launched a series of hopeless counterattacks in a desperate effort to...
Yes, despite all of this, the Germans still put up a tremendous fight, with men like Walter Model conducting a brilliant defense of the Siegfried Line, and even defeating the American advance through the Hürtgen Forest. Yes, they still were able to put up a tremendous fight. Germany's one of those examples of they put up everybody thought they would go down, and they wouldn't go down.
To secure a separate peace with the Western Allies. The endless string of failures and disappointments that followed were blamed on those senior officers who remained. Many of these men, including Field Marshals Gunther von Kluge and Erwin Rommel, chose to take their own lives rather than face disgrace and execution at their leaders' hands. By 1940...
And Rommel is the example of he was mentioned in the collaboration of Operation Valkyrie, even though he didn't do anything. Just the mere mention of that meant he would die. And you can see the problem here for the general staff.
When the German military was disintegrating entirely, most remaining officers began to abandon the sinking ship. Many moved to save their ill-gotten fortunes, shifting the cash that had bought their loyalty for so long out of German banks and into hidden vaults. The few shreds of OKW that remained took it upon themselves to coordinate their troops' retreat so that as few men as possible wound up in Soviet hands. Hitler remained...
That is true. A lot of the field commanders at this time were just trying, in 45, when they were Berlin, they were just trying to get to the Allied line, to the Western Allies, British and American lines, okay? They were trying to get their guys there. They would tell them to break off and run for it. They're trying to get to the Western Allies because they knew if they got captured by POWs as a Soviet, they're basically fucking dead. It's just a simple truth.
Fanatical and defiant until the end, but by this point, there was no Germany left to carry out his orders. When Hitler ended his own life on April 30th, it fell to the former head of Naval High Command, Admiral Karl Dönitz, to negotiate the unconditional surrender of Germany. This was a fitting end for a military leadership that was marred by infighting and miscommunication from start to finish.
And it was basically because it was left to Karl Dönitz because Goering and Himmler basically betrayed Hitler, and he removed them both from power and wanted them arrested, and Dönitz was the only one left. So.
With a man at the top who alternated between obsessively controlling all facets of the military and passively endorsing whichever of his bickering advisors caught his attention, alongside a fragmented high command rarely capable of working together.
So yeah, I hope I added something to that. I probably made this video extremely fucking long, but hopefully I added some commentary to that stuff that you guys like. Go ahead, leave me a like if you're still here. Otherwise, leave some comments and see if you disagree with me down there. Otherwise, I will see you people next time.